We are going to have a fantastic show today because one of the things I like to do is I like to talk to people who are a little bit ahead of me. I just talked to Luke Barnett a little while ago. He's a little bit ahead of me, but I also like to have conversations with people who are trying to learn something that I've maybe worked on a little bit before, because it only helps me get better at understanding what I was doing, and it helps somebody else be able to start to take off. And so today is going to be a really cool show because Tones approached me, and Tones has a fantastic idea for a story. And he was like, what kind of format should this be in? If I go down this kind of path, what should that look like? And I went, every time you ask me those questions, Tones, they're such good questions that we should do a show about it. So here we are. We're doing a show. Tones and the crew have questions for me. I'll be digging into some resources along the way when maybe I'm not the expert of experts, and we'll dive into somebody else who is. But why don't you guys introduce yourselves and talk to me a little bit about what you're up to?
Yeah, so my name's Tones. I do a podcast with Candy Camper right below Jay, and we kind of just talk about everything and anything. We have guests on with like we've had actors, we've had Jay on, we've had athletes on. We talk a little bit about everything and just have a good time and chill. And me and Candid, we're family. We've known each other for a while, so we kind of just came up. We wanted to write a story, and I came up with the concept for it. And it was something that I really never did. No, I've never written anything. Candid has actually written a couple books, and I said, why not? Let's try to get it going. So I thought of a story that I initially I had a different kind of, not supernatural, but what's the word, mythical creature. I had a different kind of mythical creature in the works, but and then finally I came down to something else, and we'll get into all that a little bit. But and then like you said, I approached Jay and the way I wanted to write it, and the way I was writing it at first, it wasn't comfortable, like writing it like a book. I'm not much of a book reader, but it wasn't comfortable as far as writing it that way. So I tried doing like a script kind of format. So I think I wrote, and Kenny kind of read what I was writing, and Colin. I felt more comfortable doing that, and I think the story I was trying to tell was way more easier to get out as well. So I had to run to Jay and ask him some couple questions, and here we are.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's perfect. And then we've got Colin and Candy Camper. Now tell me a little bit about, like, how did you guys get passionate about what Tones was up to and say, like, yeah, I want to work on this with you?
Yeah, I can kick that part off. That's cool with you, Colin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how it all goes with Tones. He calls you up or I call him up, and our brains just kind of start flowing and spitting things and nonsense out. And then Tones pretty much spitting nonsense at me, and then he said a few key words. I'm like, oh, okay, this is something I haven't heard before. And at that point, I'm like, yeah, I want to do this with you. Like, this is a great concept. This is amazing. It's like one of those when you're making that perfect song, and the person's in the studio is like, yeah, it's gonna be a hit. Yeah. And that's kind of where we went from there. But like you're saying, it's kind of one of those concepts where you can go multiple different ways, and we just need to figure out which way we really need to go with it. It can be a lot bigger than we think it could be, and if we do it in the right format, it'll definitely be bigger than it should be. So
that's dope. That's cool. What about you, Colin? Yeah, how did you join the team?
I'm a little later to the team, more of a more recent addition, I think. And I would say that, Tones and I had been talking before about, I do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm really used to writing larger campaigns and especially in like a fantasy setting with a lot of homebrewed made up stuff. So when I started kind of exploring that with Tones, he was like, oh, I think I'd like your input on this too. And so I definitely enjoy that. I mean, I've written a couple of things, but way more on the literary side of it than in a script format. So it's definitely been a big learning curve. And I think even now we're still like working out more the idea concepts and like trying to, and I think that if anything, I'm probably really frustrating because I really like to get into the very nitty gritty details of everything. And like, well, why does that happen that way? Why does that happen that way? So, that's probably more my role in the team, is like trying to find the plot holes, and say like, hey, let's tie that knot here. but no, I enjoy it a lot. And same thing that Candid said. I think it's a pretty novel idea, and there's a lot of cool things that you can work on creatively to make it even more unique. And I think that it's so open ended right now that we've gotten kind of like the right minds thinking in the right ways. And I think that the way that we're kind of developing the idea now is putting it more into like a centered idea. So anyway, I really enjoy it, and I love these guys. Working with them has been a lot of fun too, and it's kind of just a nice excuse to take a step away from regular life and work on something creative.
Yeah, that's dope. So let me tell you guys a little bit about why I like what you just described and why I like this fitting into a team. To a certain extent, what Camper just said was, I'm kind of the Rick Rubin. Like I know what taste is, and when I know that taste is there, I can identify it, right? And that's actually something that's really interesting because a lot of writers they don't know that piece of it because they can't remove themselves from the actual work. They're embedded in the work, and they can't step back and view it from an objective place. They can only view it from a subjective. This is what I put in there, and I have all this passion for it. So of course I think it's good, but it's hard to see what objectively how someone else could think it was good. So Camper's got that kind of like that Rick Rubin-esque. I can't remember who I was listening to. They were asking about like why Rick Rubin is so great, and they're like he just has taste, and like his taste is what the world wants. It's like not that many people have that, so that's cool. And then what I love about Colin, your involvement is that I think that one of the things I love about I've never actually played a D&D game in person, like around a table.
Mhm.
I've obviously played D&D games like on video games. But what I love about the table format and concept is that your story has to be good because your audience is sitting in front of you. Because so if you need to, if there's somebody, it's kind of like when I hear stand-up comics talk about being a stand-up comic, every idea is great in your head until it comes out of your mouth and you have to watch the reaction of the people in front of you, right? And so I think that that's a really cool way of like testing ideas, is testing them in front of people. So I like this team. I like the way this team is structured, and I think you guys are gonna do some pretty cool stuff. So Tones, why don't you give us like just some high level thoughts about what this story is so people can understand like what genre it's in, what is it kind of all about. You don't have to get too specific if you don't want to, but if you want to get specific, you can. Just give us a little bit of background on like where this story came from and how you want to write it and what it's all about.
So for people who know me and know what kind of like TV shows I like to watch, it's obvious that Game of Thrones and House of Dragon are my all-time favorite, stories and TV shows. Fantasy has been one. It's a open world. You can do whatever you want to this, and I kind of wanted that integrated into the story I wanted to write. And so it's pretty much it's about vampires in a set in medieval times. And we'll have different other supernatural entities inside this story, but it's going to be about revenge and how well these characters can keep their cool even though they're vampires, and they don't want to be. Of course there's going to be plots where there's bad and good, stuff like that, but the characters I am developing, I want them to be honorable, noble, to their people. And I think, we don't see that very much, especially in medieval kind of movies and vampires. So I think that part of the story is going to be fun to write, in general, and I got these, like you said, Colin he's a fantasy writer. We brought him in because not only have we done some podcasts and stuff, and we kind of picked his brain about D&D, but just his knowledge about how to integrate fantasy into a story. We kind of, and Colin's just an all-around great guy, so we figured why not. And Candid, I mean, if you heard our podcast, you would know exactly why I brought him on. The things that come out of his mouth and he thinks of is insane. So and like you said, he Candid specifically, he gave me the like, wow, this is a great idea. like you should run with it. And it made me even more motivated to do the story. And I'm a big fantasy guy, like I said. So something that I wanted to do was write. And to your credit, Jay, I've watched your videos, and since we've got to know each other, you inspired me to even write even more because of your videos and how you did things. I figured, now, I'm not saying that what you did was easy, because it for sure wasn't, but it intrigued me to know if I can do this or not. So that's pretty much where I'm at right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's really good to hear. I'm glad. I hope other people will be inspired by this conversation too. And just let me give a quick shout out, Bad Thoughts Pod and Bad Thoughts Studio, both fantastic shows. You should go check them out on YouTube. Definitely. These guys are doing great stuff out there. And I'm part of the Orange Grove 55 crew, and we are constantly on each other's shows. So it's great.
We're one big family.
One big family. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So you guys have some questions for me. So let me just give a little bit of background. You guys came to me and you had a couple questions about what kind of medium should you write in? Should you write a novel? Should you write a screenplay? Should you write a TV show? We even talked about graphic novels and the differences between all of those. And I think you guys have kind of landed on doing a TV series, sort of more like Game of Thrones. You're a big TV series fans, Tone, so that makes a lot of sense. And I told you, hey, anytime you have more questions, like, let's do a show. So you guys have more questions now. So you hit me with those questions and we'll get into it.
So initially when I hit you up, the one thing you said to do was, because I asked you about festivals that you had you had submitted your work in, and I knew I wanted to write the series, but I didn't know since you mentioned the festivals, I didn't know what I needed to write for these festivals. So obviously we're going to write the whole story. We're going to write like the first 2 seasons or whatever the case may be, but before we send in the pilot. But the one thing that you said was, if you do send something into these festivals, a pilot episode is what you're going to be sending in. So we wanted to work this episode around perfecting a pilot episode. So first of all, can you explain, I mean, obviously most of us know what a pilot episode is, but as far as like writing, what needs to be in this pilot episode to intrigue people to want to know more about the story?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yeah. Really good question. So the one caveat I'm going to give, and I told the guys this before the show, is that I have written comic books, never published any of them, but I've written them. I have written screenplays, and I've studied screenplays a lot. So I'm pretty familiar with screenplays. And screenplays are highly related to television. I've actually written books. I've published books. The one thing I have not written a lot of is TV. So I've had a pilot script do really well in competitions, but I would not consider myself at all a TV expert. So if you are and you're watching this, feel free and correct anything that I say that's stupid down in the comments below. Couple things that I think about when I was thinking about writing my own TV pilot. And also when I've talked to my friends. So Phil Shabazz, who plays Lazarus Lagmani in our short film, he asked me to read his pilot, and he actually did a pilot episode with a story Bible, which basically gives the rest of what happens in the rest of the season, and it highlights each of the characters and stuff like that.
Okay.
Which I thought was cool. Or a series Bible, I guess you'd call it, because he even had a season 2 like that he could pitch on top of the season 1. So that's always a good thing to have as well. Like in the film world, we'd call that more of like a lookbook, and it's about the film itself. But this is like a series Bible, saying like, because the one difference with film versus TV is a lot of times, not always. I can't remember the guy who writes for White Lotus. He writes every episode himself. Like, he just does it all. There's several writers like that. Taylor Sheridan, the Yellowstone guy, he writes all of the stuff himself too. In other words, he doesn't have a writer's room. But a lot of times, the traditional format for TV is that you would have a showrunner. So you might be the showrunner, Tones, and then you say, I'm gonna have a writer's room, and Candid's gonna be in the writer's room, and Colin's gonna be in the writer's room, and then I'm gonna hire 3 other writers to be in the writer room, and then we're gonna constantly pitch ideas and just make sure that the story is like exactly on track where we want it to go. And that's how they get episodes done faster so that they can move into production, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
And so you generally will have a room around you, which is why a series Bible is important, so that for the person whose idea it was not, can always refer back to, well, what does this Bible say about where we're going? You know what I mean? It's a document that guides everybody through the process. So that was a lot of not answering your question. So let me answer your question. I think some of the biggest things to do in a pilot episode are to, and this is true of any story, right? Like you can think of the pilot episode as like almost like the beginning of Act 1 of the screenplay, or the beginning of Act 1 of a comic book or whatever. What do you need to know in Act 1? I need to know who these characters are. I need to know why I should care about these characters. And I need to know the central conflict that's going to happen in this show, right? And you can take a pilot episodes that we've all seen, and you can kind of break all of that down, right? Like Game of Thrones basically introduced us and said, here are the Lannisters and here are the Starks, and they're very different from each other. And here's why you should care about each of them. You should basically learn to hate the Lannisters as soon as you see them, and you should learn to love the Starks as soon as you see them, despite their flaws, right? And then what else did it give us? It gave us the central conflict of them saying the Starks are going to enter a realm that is uncomfortable to them, and they're going to be influential, or they could be influential or not influential in that new world, the politics of the realm, because they've not really been about the politics of the realm all that much, and they've been kind of self-contained and protected. So if they enter the politics of the realm, what does that mean? That's going to cause conflict of some way, shape, or form. And then there's prophecies about them. Oh my gosh, this is getting even crazy. There's dire wolves that they're getting, which, by the way, the dire wolves didn't end up being a main part of the story.
Yeah, I know.
And then also the Lannisters. The Lannisters have all this power and control. But remember how the end of episode 1 ends, when you realize that like the Lannisters are super corrupt. Like not only do they, spoiler alert here if you haven't seen Game of Thrones, not only do they kill Eddard Stark, but they also are having incestuous relationships, and killing a kid who was spying on them is no big deal to these people, right? Or trying to kill a kid. So that has so much. So what's essential there? Characters that we care about. I mean, one of the big things about Game of Thrones is that big spoiler at the end of episode 1 when they kill Eddard. Is like, that's the one guy in all of Game of Thrones that everybody that watches could be like, that's probably the hero. And they're like, fuck that guy. He's done, right? So like that takes the whole show in a new direction of like, what world am I watching? Because I've never seen anything like this before, right? So to me, you got to have these characters that people really care about. You have to have a central conflict that's introduced early on that showcases kind of what kind of world I'm getting into and whether or not I care about that central conflict. Do I care about the politics of the realm and the politics of families and how they interact? Or do I go, no, that's not really my jam? Do I care about the genre? Do I care about entering a fantasy genre and watching a whole series about fantasy? Or do I not? Am I not into that? Do I care about the subject matter that's going to be in this show? Or is I read the books first and I was like, these books are so depressing that I'm not sure I can watch the show. And the show was actually less depressing, so I was able to actually watch it and like enjoy it. But like, I got to know those things as an audience to know whether or not I want to invest my time.
Now, do you have to make that obvious inside the pilot episode what the conflict is, or like, do you have to lead up to it in a fast way, slow way? What's the proper way? Because in a pilot episode make or breaks a viewer if they want to continue watching it. I know it does for me. So do you need to make it like extremely obvious, like, hey, this is going to be the conflict of the show?
I think you need to make it. Here's what you don't want to do. Okay, let me say what you don't want to do first, and then we'll get into what you do want to do. You don't want to lead off with a Camper will be right back. You don't want to lead off with something that has nothing to do with the rest of the show. Right?
Okay.
Like if you ever watch a pilot and you go like, and you have like, it's like just pure comedy, and then all of a sudden like the rest of the show is a drama, and you're like,
Yeah.
what happened? Like, so you want to make sure that the embodiment of what you're trying to do with the show is contained within the first episode. It's part of what we would call the setup, right? Like we're going to set everything up and we're going to set the table for what's to come. And if you indicate that certain things are gonna come, then you really should pay those things off later on. Otherwise, there's cognitive dissonance, right? If you ask people, if you take the show Lost, there's basically two categories of people who watch the show Lost, because the show Lost completed all of what you wanted from the characters and left all of the plot things completely unresolved, largely unresolved. Here's the thing: if you cared about the plot and it was left unresolved, you're pissed. Like my wife hated Lost. She's like, they didn't resolve anything. And I'm like, well, they resolved the character stuff that they had set up, right? So you're not going to please everybody all the time, but you do need to, even in the very beginning, indicate like these characters will have these problems and they're going to go on a journey around those kind of problems, right? And like some of the best shows of all time have done that just super well, like Breaking Bad even, right? Where it's like, here's just a guy who lives in like essentially like middle class Albuquerque. He's completely uninteresting. How is this guy going to be interesting?
Exactly.
Like, he's going to cook meth. Oh my gosh. Like that's pretty interesting. Right. So it gives us a feel for like, what type of show is this? What type of characters are these? And where are they going with all of this? So that has to be there. What you don't want to do though, is set the table for things that don't matter later on. Right. You can do these surprising things and like shock the audience like Game of Thrones does. But you can't, you still have to make sure that when you do those things, there's a reason you did them and a payoff to it so that it all makes sense if people were to go back. Right. Which of course Game of Thrones does masterfully until like season 5, 6, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. And then 7, 8 kind of doesn't conclude the way you thought it would based on what came beforehand. You and I have talked about that a lot. We actually did a show about that.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that would be kind of my answer. I know it's a little bit broad, but that's kind of how I would answer that question.
Okay. Another thing is you mentioned characters. What is there a limit of characters you should throw into one episode or into a pilot? Because
I don't know if there's a rule of thumb. I mean, let me review this article and see if it had a number of characters that because I may pull this article up. It's a great Screencraft is the source of this article. It's called How to Structure a Great TV Pilot. And we will work through this if I see something that I want to bring up from it.
For sure.
But it doesn't say anything necessarily about how many characters you should have. In my opinion, Game of Thrones kind of did a masterful take at this, meaning that they introduced you to primarily the two families, and they didn't introduce you to like all the families that they were going to introduce over the course of of time. They were basically like, these two families are the families that you're going to probably care about the most, as in terms of the politics of the realm. And that stays, well, actually, technically it's 3 families.
I was about to say,
also,
the Targaryens,
the Targaryens, exactly. So, and those,
but they're
those
small.
3,
They're small. There was only 2 of them, so it wasn't like
yes.
you were meeting the whole family. So okay,
yes. So I would say you can have a lot of characters, but one of the things that people are going to gravitate more toward is they're going to gravitate toward a primary character, right? One of the things that makes Game of Thrones. So let me point to Game of Thrones as doing something, and then we can break down why they did it. Game of Thrones the writers knew very well what the rule was. The rule was people are going to fall in love with the lead character, and we're going to want to follow their arc through this whole series. It's very dangerous to break the rule of killing off one of the people that you were all wanting to see them have this really great arc through the whole series. But Game of Thrones knew we have a bunch of other characters that people care about. So if we take this one off the board, it's going to make you shocked. It's going to make you think like, what in the world is going to happen later on in this show? And it's going to actually engage people into wanting to be like, where is this going to go? My stupid thumbs up thing. So I think that the number of characters should be it should be focused around a few of them, right?
Okay.
Because we're getting connected. We get connected to characters, and so usually what happens is you introduce us to some of the most important ones, and there's a very limited set of those. And as you introduce other people, it's almost the story becomes almost more about like, how are these people affected by the other characters? But I still care about this core group, and so I got to care about that core group. And Game of Thrones, to be honest with you, gets away with a lot because they have so many characters, but they do it really, really well. So that can be more difficult, but they're pro level at it, and they do it really, really well.
Gotcha. You guys can feel free to chime in a little bit here.
Oh no, you're asking all the good questions, dude.
Well, I was gonna say Game of Thrones was really lucky in that first episode because they literally got to introduce the characters, and in the show they're being introduced. Yep. So it's like they're all in a line, and it's like, here's this person by name, here's this person by name, and it's like, oh, I'm meeting them. You know, like as the viewer, you get to meet them with the other people who are meeting them. So it's like, man, I was thinking about that too. It's like, how many major characters are in the first episode? It's like 15. Yeah. It's like an insane number of people that are going to be in the show throughout. Basically, most of them last to season 8, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that is pretty cool. I was going to ask, and it's a little bit off the topic of this, but as far as the pilot goes and kind of the general direction of the show of like, at what point do you like, where's the balancing act between making something that's marketable and then being kind of like true to the art that you're trying to produce, you know? That's where I find the most conflict of like, I want to have something that's digestible to the majority of people out there. And I understand, you know, you're not going to make everyone happy, but at the same time, at what point does that cross into just being like a shill or just like writing something that everybody's going to love just because, and there's no soul to it anymore. You know, it is just like, how does that balancing act work, at least in your experience and what you've worked on in the past?
Oh, that is such a good question. Okay, so I'm gonna give an answer, and then the viewers can decide whether or not this answer is intelligent or not. One of the things I talked a lot about with tones, and it comes from a book called, I think it's behind me somewhere. Yeah, it's back there. The Art of Dramatic Writing. I don't know if you can see it. It's right there.
The red one, right?
Yeah,
the red one or the white one?
It's like purple. Right there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Purple with red writing. That is a book by a guy named Laios Agree. I think I pronounce it wrong every single time. Someone corrects me in the comments. But he was writing for the stage, and he writes about character arcs, and he writes about the premise. And the premise is a concept that I think is one of the most underrated concepts in all of storytelling. And I think that most people skip it because it's not necessarily the sexy thing. The concept is sexy, the log line is sexy, the genre is sexy, but the premise is not always sexy because the premise is the thing that you truly have wrestled with and believe in, right? So the premise is characters face conflict, and then this is the result, right? And it's usually something that is a conceptualization of truth, right? And so the stories that people love, it's going to keep doing that stupid thumbs up thing.
I think every time you do a thumbs up, it comes up.
It comes up every single time. I'm not even trying to do a thumbs up. I'm just like literally moving my hand. It's like, but so the point is that stories resonate when it is about a shared human experience that other people can watch and associate with and go, wow, there's truth in that. Like the stories fall flat when you have something that's like anything that is not about the shared human experience and truth is essentially propaganda.
So
let's just face it,
you can't relate to it.
Exactly. So like for example, now some propaganda works better than other propaganda. Most Marvel stories are actually propaganda because the world doesn't work the way that Marvel stories work, where it's like, if only all of us good people band together and we'll overcome evil, you know? That's not usually how the world works, but there is some truth to it. So it's more like aspirational truth than it is like truth about our daily lives. Game of Thrones is more like truth about the daily life of living in the world. It is tragic. Bad things happen. We can't believe it. When we think someone's a hero, they end up being a villain. When we think someone's a villain, they do something good. Like that's more like lived true experience. Just like I think like Breaking Bad has a lot of lived true experience as well. It's like, even though most of us can't associate ourselves with Walt, we can associate ourselves with being like, man, I wish I could just take the bad path today. It'd be so much easier to take the bad path. And when we see kind of what the effect that has on other people, we go, oh yeah, that's why I don't take the bad path. I now remember that. So for me, the thing that brings everybody together and the thing that really attracts an audience is actually the premise, and not that many people talk about the premise. And again, it is like, let me think if I can come up with some ones off the top of my head without opening the book. He spends a lot of time talking about Shakespeare premises, which are always like amazing. So Othello, which I think is one of the best stories ever written, possibly. Othello is jealousy, or like characters who become suspicious and jealous ruin the object of the jealousy and themselves. Right? So like that's like just a truth. Like if a jealous person allows themselves to experience jealousy to its end result, it destroys not only the relationship but the person who's experiencing the jealousy. And so when you say that, like, that's why Othello has resonated for centuries, because that is still true to this day. Human beings, that is true. So for me, I like to spend a lot of time on the premise and say, if this is something that is true to me. Now, sometimes, to your question, Colin, sometimes your premise is like, it's more of a truth that you've experienced that the greater world has not necessarily experienced. And then that can limit your audience, right? Because people can go like, oh, I'm watching this, but like, I've never experienced this before, so I don't really know like what this is about. So so that can happen. But I think that as long as you stay true to the story that you feel like you want to tell, and as long as you're not putting things in there because they are convenient, you're actually putting them in there because they're true. And I'm going to give an example, and I give this example, and I know some people do not like this example, and I do not mean to disparage anybody by this example, but this is my perception of how this works. Have you guys seen Breaking Bad?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you seen what's the name of that show? Ozark. Have you seen Ozark?
I have not.
No, me neither.
Okay. So I'm going to use Ozark as an example, even though you haven't seen it. And if you ever want to like watch it and see if my example rings true to you, then let me know. But I'm going to use it as an example anyways, because you don't need to have seen it to understand it. Breaking Bad literally transitions Walt so slowly, and he has to do everything so slowly, that the conflict that they put the audience into is always earned. It's always earned. You're like, I believe he would for sure take that next step. I would for sure believe that he's dissolving bodies now to get himself out of this situation. Even though like 3 episodes ago, I would not have believed it. If you would have said like he's going to be dissolving bodies, you'd be like, no way is he going to be dissolving bodies, right? The conflict is earned. There are ways to hack the human brain in order to keep people watching. Like TikTok is based off this premise, right? Like I don't even need you to be invested in the characters. Like all I need to do is in like 15 seconds make you laugh. 15 seconds, like, so how do you hack the human brain? You hack the human brain by having what I call unearned conflict. Okay, and to me, Ozark did unearned conflict all the time. So, for example, Colin, you're building a D&D campaign, and what would be earned conflict? Earned conflict is you on the level 1 of the dungeon, you say, this dungeon keeps getting worse and worse as we go down into the deeper layers. And then on level 2, you say, there's a partial parchment of paper here that indicates that there may be like some kind of vicious minotaur 4 levels down, or a monster. We don't even know if it's a minotaur yet. And you keep ramping up that tension where people go, what is it that they're going to face? And then you, boom, at level 5, you hit them with the thing and they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's here. But the whole time you earned it, right?
Gotcha.
And I'm going to give you a specific example that I thought was awesome that someone told me one time, or I heard it on a podcast, I think. Unearned conflict is you go, level 1, we hit you with a dwarf level 5. Level 2, we hit you with, you ramp the conflict up to 10, even though you didn't foreshadow that conflict. There was no indication there was going to be that conflict. Literally, Ozark has episodes where it goes, where 2 characters will be in a scene. There will have been no foreshadowing, and all of a sudden, one of the characters in the scene will be like, I can't believe you're cheating on your wife. And you're like, whoa, what? Where did that come from? And the only reason they do that is because it's a brain hack. Because now if I say this person's cheating on their wife, the conflict in the scene ratchets up to 10. It doesn't need to be earned anymore, right? So I think that the best stories also earn what they're going to give you later on. And I'm going to give one quick story. I know I'm taking way too long to answer your questions, so I'll try to be shorter. But I think this story was so good. I love telling people this story. There was an opera singer on this program I was listening to, and the program was about storytelling. I can't remember which podcast it was because I would give them credit. It might have been Hidden Brain, might have been something else. But what she said was that she, as a young performer, as a young opera singer, would always concentrate on hitting the high notes. Just, I'm going to concentrate on the high note, concentrate on the high note. Everything else that comes before is just preamble, and who cares? Like, it's all about that high note when I get to that high note. And she said a lot of more senior performers, veteran performers, kept telling her the way that the brain, the human brain, builds dopamine is that it takes what you're hinting at doing and it puts a little bit more dopamine in, and then it puts a little bit more dopamine in, and then it puts a little bit more dopamine in. So if you neglect all of this process leading to the high note, then what you've done is you've neglected massaging someone's brain to a place where it was ready for the high note. And so if you hit the high note, they might still be impressed. But if you spent the time beforehand kind of just measuring out, like, here's some foreshadowing, here's some things that I might be leading up to later, here's some things that you might see later on, and then you hit them with the high note, or you hit them with the climax of the story or whatever, it's just like the release of dopamine in the brain is ridiculous at that point, right?
Gotcha.
And so I think that's another way of like differentiating between like what the great content is versus even just good content.
And question on that then, how many times can you use that within a story? And how soon should you be able to implement that into it? Because can you just hit them again and then just again and again?
So there's 2 answers to that question. That's a really good question. 2 answers to that question. In a TV series, you need to be good at having the structure of the episode has its own structure. And you have to have like the rising action of the episode, the climax of the episode, the resolution of the episode. That's just a preamble to the next episode, right? So the answer to that question is you have to be good at doing it 2 ways if you're writing for TV. If you're writing for the movies, by the way, you just have to be good at doing it 1 time, right? And then that's the end of the movie. We got them. It was perfect. If you're writing a TV series, you have to do it every episode and then every season finale. So you have to, each one has its own story pattern that you're kind of metering out to say, like, I'm building the whole season towards this climax, and I'm also building every episode towards a minor climax that gets us closer to that major climax. And you're doing it both ways in a series, any kind of serial storytelling.
I do. That's awesome. That makes a lot more sense. Basically, because otherwise we're not going to be intrigued and want to watch the next episode unless we get that pushback. Going back one step to what we were talking about earlier, how long are those pilots? Like, if you had something that that was really good, can you make a 2-hour long pilot if you need to, or an hour? I'm assuming 2 hours would be way too long.
Yeah. So here, I'll bring up this article again. This is from Screencraft. One of the things I love about Screencraft is that Screencraft has some of the best contests in the writing sphere, and they have multiple different versions. So I do recommend, if you're going to get into the contest world, definitely look into what Screencraft has available. So what they said is that they go through here and give a very similar to what I told Tones in terms of how long it should be. Let me find that real
You said
quick.
45 to 60 pages, I believe.
45 to 60, and they say here 45 to 63, the sweet spot being around 50 to 55. So here's why that is. Here's why that is, and here's why people break that rule. So the first reason why that is because, generally speaking, we live in a new world now of streaming, and so a lot of the rules are being broken. But back in the day, the reason why this was really important was because when you were gonna plot a show into your TV lineup, you usually only had an hour to plug, right? You couldn't do like an hour and 15 because you're like encroaching on someone else's show at that point, right? And so they used to stick to those rules like pretty like perfectly. All of the major TV shows that have been running forever, they all fit into that perfect box. Even the HBO shows, which have a little bit more flexibility, because they didn't have as many ad breaks. A lot of times HBO didn't have any ads at all, so they could be a little bit more flexible, but it still fit inside the hour of programming, right?
Mhm.
There wasn't like, it didn't break into like an hour and 15 very often. We've seen this rule be broken in streaming when the show is never intended to be released on linear ever, right? On a network TV show ever. So you'll see like Disney Plus has been doing this like crazy. I actually think it's been detrimental to Disney Plus, but they'll have shows that are all over the map. Like one show's 35, the next show's 75. Like, well, not 75.
Percy Jackson was a prime example, and like you said, a detriment to that show. One episode was 30 minutes. The next was 45. Next would be, and mind you, there's a end credit scene and a on the last episode of Percy Jackson. So most of it was like a 25 minutes.
Yeah.
One was 45 minutes. So it just didn't make sense. But sorry to interrupt.
No. I'm glad you did. That was perfect. Please do interrupt if you have good examples like that. That's awesome. So Candid, to your question, like, why would you not do a show where you release 2 hours at a time? And by the way, Disney has released 2 hours at a time, but why did Disney release 2 hours at a time? Generally speaking, they did it because they felt like the first episode was not strong enough to hook people. And so they said, if we can give them 2 episodes right up front, they'll come back when the next episode is released, because they're not giving it to you in a binge format, right? So if you didn't like the first episode, you may never come back to watch next week's episode. You might be like, I'm out. But if I give you 2 episodes, you go, I didn't really like the first one, but I mean, the second one's right there, so I'll watch it and see what happens. And they'll break those rules. That's generally speaking what I think that rule is broken for. But here's why I like the structure of old school linear television. I think it's very difficult to tell writers and writing teams that there are no rules. Write a 25-minute episode if you want, write a 50-minute episode if you want, because you can't get into a format, and therefore you can't structure your show strategically. It's kind of more just hit or miss about how you structure your show. And to your point, Tones, sometimes that will be like, you didn't get what you needed to hit in 25 minutes, or it took you 50 minutes and then a lot of that was filler, because, you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't really work for me personally. And so I kind of, if I were writing a show, again, I'm not right now, I'm not actively writing a TV series right now, but if I were, I would stick to 45 to 63 and try to nail that 50 to 55 if I could for every single episode I wrote.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And I agree with you on that. When they make the 2 hour ones, you're like, damn, I have to watch the second one. But it's also strategic, because now I already watched 2. That means even if the show's kind of shitty, I have to watch the 3rd and 4th episode too. So they're still going to get their screen time out of it, or the viewing time.
Right.
But at the same time too, most shows like I've watched are an hour.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense.
And like Percy Jackson, for instance, like it gave you a 2 episode premiere. It was the first 2 episodes, and they were 30 to 35 minutes, I believe it was. And then they hit us with the 3rd episode that was 45 minutes. And man, did they! It was nowhere near the first 2 episodes. It wasn't to my liking. But then the crazy part is the 4th episode was another like 30 minutes. Like it just fluctuated to a point where I was just lost. I don't think there's certain characters and IPs, and Percy Jackson is one that you need an hour-long show to get your point across. And to me, that was missed in that show. I wasn't a big fan of the show. wasn't my cup of tea. The action was non-existent to me. The storyline was mid at best, and people use that excuse, oh, it's a kid show. Well, Stranger Things was definitely a kid show, and it was phenomenal. It brought in a lot of these adults. Me and you, we loved it. Like it was a great one of Netflix's best series, and it brought us in as adults. And I don't like that excuse. It's a kid show.
Yeah,
like what I'm saying, especially for big IPs like Percy Jackson. In my opinion.
Here's my take on figuring out on writing versus producing and editing, right? So when you write a script, the general rule of thumb is that it's 1 minute per page. So one page is a minute of screen time. Now, there have been a lot of studies that have said, like, is that actually true? And it's not. It's not actually true. Like it's not. There's not a 1-to-1 relationship between a page and a minute of screen time. But here's why limiting the page count and trying to still stay within that hour-long 60-minute show still works, is because some scenes will take longer to film, some scenes will be shorter to film than you read on page. And then on top of that, when you get into editing, I think editing is the ultimate arbiter of whether or not the show could be longer or shorter, not writing. Like the editor could go, wow, if we actually cut these 3 scenes out, this flows better. Well, the writer has a hard time cutting those scenes out because in your mind, you're like, well, I'm leading up to this thing and I have to have these other scenes so it works. But the editor, a really good editor, can come in and go, actually, the audience would understand 100% why we left those 3 scenes out. So we're just going to pull them, and it actually is a tighter product at that point. But I don't think you should worry about that as a writer. I think you should worry about writing your 50 pages of awesome material, and then hopefully they don't cut any of it because it's so amazing they don't have to, right? But that's the only time I can see it being like more of like an editing decision, because sometimes writers will end up with bloated scripts because they're not seeing the forest for the trees, basically, right? They're unable to kind of get out of their own brain. And editors, that's their whole purpose, is to be like, objectively, you don't need that or whatever. So yeah, I would leave it to the editors to cut it down, but you just write your scripts the same.
So at that point, when you have these editors and you have the Percy Jackson, how much of that is Disney, and how much of that is the editor, and how much of that is the producer? Like, where do you stand there, and who's always right? Is it the person that's giving the money at the end of the day?
So the answer to that question is, so whenever someone says to me, that's bad writing, I go, it's very difficult for anyone to assess bad writing without reading the script first, right? If you read the script and you saw what they put on screen, you could say, so for example, I really enjoy Taylor Sheridan. He wrote Sicario. I just did a whole breakdown video about Sicario. I watched the movie several times. I read the screenplay. I will tell you that the movie is better than the screenplay, right? Much respect for Taylor Sheridan. I'm just saying, like, you can tell that the screenplay is very compelling. You can tell that it would make a good movie, but I would say that the movie is superior. There are some movies where the screenplay is far superior, right? Like the screenplay, you're like, this is actually a kind of a work of art, but the way they put this movie together doesn't work. So the only way you're going to know if something is bad writing is or bad editing is if you would have to know the whole process. You have to read the screenplay. You have to see what they cut out. You have to see all that kind of stuff. So the short answer is it's very difficult to tell. Usually if I make commentary on something, I will say, did you guys watch Moon Knight?
Yes.
Okay. So I won't spoil anything, but I felt like Moon Knight was one of these series that I'm like, I don't think they knew where to cut the episode off and then like lead into the next episode. There's one episode where I'm like, you could have cut it off right there, but instead you gave us 10 minutes of extra episode that like could have been in the next episode, but it's kind of too boring. Like it was too boring to end the episode that way. And so that's where I go, that could have been a writing issue, but I still think the editors could have solved it, and they didn't, right? Like they still chose to leave it the way that it was, or they chose to edit it and the writers actually got it perfect, but the editors were like, no, we don't like that. We're gonna end this other way instead. But the problem is that I'm making an assumption based on a finished product that I don't know all of what it went into. So it's very difficult to say, but there are certain things you can pick up on. Like I said, if you've read the screenplay, you can kind of pick up on the fact that like, let me say it this way: Taylor Sheridan's screenplay is very compelling, but the visuals that Denis Villeneuve put into Sicario far exceed what was in the screenplay. Whereas, like, if you read Chinatown, the screenplay of Chinatown, and you watch the movie Chinatown, you're like, holy shit, these are both insanely compelling. Like, you could read the script or watch the movie, and either way, you're like, this is a fantastic piece of art, right? So it just kind of depends on how it all shakes out.
And then I got one thing to tie on that.
Yeah.
When you're in that room and you have all these people in there and you have the giant executive and your screenplay goes onto the table and it's shared with everybody.
Yeah.
Does everybody look up at that one person still? And if they like it, then it goes forward. What if you have 10 people that like it, but that main person does not, but they're the ones that fit, foots the bill? How do you react to that? And what do? You just take it somewhere else, or do you have someone that maybe believes in you? Like, how does that work?
So I've never experienced this because I've never pitched to anybody and never pitched a TV show to anybody. I will say that.
Have you ever pitched your movies before, like to a big companies?
I haven't had to yet. No, I haven't had. My intent is, as soon as this short film is done, I want to pitch the feature to. To studios.
Gotcha.
Ironically, I've pitched a bunch to investors and businesses. That's like a totally separate thing because I do that in my career. Like, I've started companies and I've pitched to investors about stuff, and I train other people how to do that. So I'm pretty confident that my pitch will be good when I'm finally in the room. But I've never even tried to get it in the room, right? So let me answer your question based on what I've heard other people say that I have no experience in. So if you've experienced it, leave us down in the comments. There are, just like in business, one of the things I train people in when I'm teaching them to pitch to a business is that I teach them to think about not how they are passionate. Every business solves a problem. Some people are passionate about solving that problem. And then they say, well, let's create a company. But in order to create this company, we need investors. So we'll go pitch to investors. And I feel like this is also true for people pitching to creative endeavors as well. It's a business. It's still a business, right? So you are not always trying to convince people that your business is something that they will love. You're trying to convince them that you have an audience that will make them money, right? So does that mean that it's that? So writers and people who are not in the business side like to think like, this is my personal private, I put so much time and energy into this. And the person on the other side of the table may literally just be thinking like, can I make money off this or can I not? Now, if you take that and say like, okay, why does so much shit get made that will never make money? And that's almost always political. And it's almost always like the writers pitch something awesome, but then when the whole thing got put together, like it didn't get enough budget, it got the wrong people involved, whatever, and it just didn't come out right because other people weren't as passionate about the writer, or the writer. Sometimes you get writers who like are put in a position that they're not ready for, and so then they can't really lead the team that's supposed to do it. And so even though it was awesome on paper, it's not awesome when it finishes. So the question of like whether or not you're going to pitch something and whether or not it's going to get picked up. The number one thing, and if you listen to the Luke Barnett interview I did, which is the last
episode,
interview,
by the way, great episode.
Oh, cool! Thanks, Tones. Luke is amazing. I met him on Twitter. I didn't even know the guy, but I'm like, this guy's awesome. So I want to talk to him. One of the things that he said is what I think is very, very true. And if you pitch to literary agents or literary, like trying to get your book published, it's the exact same thing. You're not going to go to a place that publishes romance novels and be like, let me convince you that my sci-fi space epic is like something you should publish, right? They go, we don't do, our whole business model is romances. Like, I'm not going to make money off this, right? And so just when you go in, like Luke said the same thing, and this is the wisdom I've heard from multiple people, is that when you go in to do something, you pitch it to the people who are most likely to be like, yeah, I like this. This is like what we do. We do it well. I know how to give the right resources to this project. I know where to go market this project when it's done. I know how to get an audience for this project because we just did Dune. So of course we can do another space sci-fi epic, right? And that was kind of the general wisdom I've heard, is like, just try to get involved with the people that are producing the kinds of things that you want to get produced.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
When you were saying all of that out, all I was thinking of is like, yeah, you can write, produce, direct, act in your own project, and you can just be Tommy Wiseau, and you're an absolute monster on the screen. So
Exactly.
But so unless you have that kind of capital, I agree, and that's kind of what led back to my original question of like, at what point do you compromise a little bit of what your story is in order to make it more marketable to an audience?
Yep.
And that, I feel like, is difficult to judge at what point you've given away too much of it and it's not what you want it to be anymore. Now it's made for screen, and now it's made for this sect of the population, as opposed to, I kind of just wanted to tell a story that should be universally approachable, but now all of a sudden it's only appealing to high school girls or something. So.
Right. Well, let me give you a perfect example of, it may not be a perfect example, but it's one that like strikes me as being really relevant. HBO just signed a deal. It may have been Max. I'm not sure how they're labeling that anymore. Just signed a deal with Craig Mazin. So Craig Mazin is the writer of The Last of Us. He's also the writer of so he's also the writer of Chernobyl. I could not think of the name of it. Okay, so before Chernobyl and before The Last of Us, if you go to Craig Mazin's IMDb, I highly recommend people do that. He basically was involved in like teen parody movies, like Scary Movie franchise, and like, so if you go to his IMDb, you'd see this career that's like, he's producing all this stuff.
Hangover,
like nothing. Yeah, Hangover. Yeah, he did Hangover.
Or Hangover. Yeah,
it's nothing like what he's doing today, which is like top tier, best in class stuff. And so sometimes what happens is you do projects because you are a good writer, and it may not be the thing that you believe in the most, but you just say, I want to write. That is not me, right? Like, if you said to me tomorrow, hey, you can write for generic CW series, I would be very thankful for the opportunity, but I would decline it, because I would go, that's not really why I'm involved in. Why did I shoot the short film myself and pay for it all to be done? Because I know the vision of the kind of stuff that I want to do, and that some of these things wouldn't fit into that, right? Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to take that path, but other people will take that path. So you might say it's more important for me to sell this than it is for me to make it perfect the way I wanted to make it. And that is not an unacceptable thing to do. That's totally acceptable for you to do. And there's just different ways. There's different paths to success, and there's different ways for you to get your name out there. And for a lot of people, they would say, I would rather sell this to someone else and have them make it their vision and have it actually get made, even if it's shit. At least I can have that on my resume now, and I go to the next thing and I go, well, I did do that, and that did either make money or people liked it or whatever, or I had the experience working with it in this context, and now I'd like to I build my resume and I go to the next thing. And that is not a problem for you to do either. A lot of really great people do that.
So when people write a book and they write multiple books a year, is that the same kind of concept? Just let me write this one and on to the next, and it does what it does, and you just forget about it?
Yeah, for a lot of people, that's how it works. I mean, each one of these things, if you really analyze what makes things successful, sometimes I'll tell you, the more sophisticated a marketplace gets, the more you can start to analyze like how people become successful in that industry. Sometimes it's like run and gun, and like people build careers off like just pure luck. Like, I would tell you right now that despite the fact that Steven Spielberg is like the best director of all time, like, he got really lucky a couple times early on. Like Jaws, for example, was supposed to be a giant disaster and was saved in the edit, right? And so you'd say like, well, he didn't do a bad job of directing because there's some great shots in there. He got great performances from the actors, but like it wasn't a cohesive movie until the editor got it when like, let me shape this into a cohesive movie. And then it's like his career just skyrockets after that, right? So it's so unpredictable. But one of the things you can predict, and one of the truisms that I think is true of any industry, and very much especially film, is that if you are responsible with a little, then people will give you a little more. And if you're responsible with that, then people will give you a little more. And if you're so a lot of times people who write books, it's like my book was mildly successful, so I wrote another book and it's in the same series. Now this one actually is better than the first one. And now people will go back and read the first one so they have the context and then read the second one. And so you actually just build and build and build on top of that. And then you have a career. All of a sudden you have a career. And it is more, I have heard multiple people say this, and Luke Barnett said this as well on the podcast with me. He said, always have another project that is related to the one you're trying to sell, or the way that related to the one you just finished, just in case somebody says, do you have another vampire story that you could pitch to us? Because the last one was awesome and maybe it didn't go that far, but like I love the fact that you have vampire stories. If you're like, actually I totally abandoned vampires and I'm now doing like gross out comedies, they'd be like, oh, okay, well that's cool, but I'm not looking for that. You know what I mean? So like that's another piece of wisdom that he said, like, and I totally believe that that's true. And I've seen it a lot.
So this is probably going to be the biggest question that I had for you, because I know there might not be a proper way, but I'll ask it as if there was one.
Okay.
What's the proper way to write a story with co-writers? Because we don't have that kind of direction because we never co-write anything.
Yeah.
But obviously we have all of our ideas are going to come onto one story. But what's the proper way to co-write something, or your experience in co-writing something?
That's a really good question. Everybody's a little bit different. I've heard of some people that write like they both will be in the script at the same time, like writing stuff. I can't work that way because that to me is like that just like scrambles my brain. So I'll just explain the way that I work first and then say what I think like an effective team would be. So I always, a majority of the time I work with Nathan SCHECK, who is a co-writer of mine. Now, Nathan does not actually put any words on paper for most of our stories. What he does is he reads the stories in great detail, helps come up with the outlines, helps come up with all of the different plot points that we're trying to hit, all the emotional beats that we're trying to hit. A lot of the times the idea comes from me. I start writing it. I then show it to him. He offers recommendations on how it should go. It's almost like he's actually serving less as a writer and more as like an executive producer in some ways, right? It's like giving me notes as opposed to actually like writing it. So I function really well in that kind of environment because I think that I move like 10 times as fast as him. I think he would admit that. Like I move 10 times as fast as him in terms of writing stuff because he would be too in his head about like, is this good enough? And he'd be going over the same paragraph like 50 times. Whereas I can just get past that and just get it on paper and move on. Although that's not my strongest suit because some people are way better at that than me. And so that kind of works for us because then he offers suggestions and feedback, and then I go in and like mess with it and tweak it and try to get it to the place where even if it's not what he suggested, it's still a place where it's better than it was, right?
Okay.
So what is working about that, and what could potentially be better about that? The thing that I think works really well is that we each know each other's role, and that is, I think, essential to any team. If you go into it thinking that like, let's just say you went into it and Tones, you were like, I'm going to be the guy that puts everything on paper. And then all of a sudden Colin is going in there and like changing paragraphs and moving stuff around. And you're like, what the hell, dude? Like, I thought I'm the one that puts stuff on paper. Like, why are you doing that or whatever, right? So if you know your roles and know what each other's strengths and weaknesses are, and you work towards those by defining your roles, you're basically saying, I will be the person who does X, and then you will be the person who does Y, and you will be the person who does Z, whatever. And together, this will make a better finished product. And then the second thing is how the mindset, right? what is the mindset to working with other people to accomplish a goal? First of all, knowing what the goal is. Like, you have to have an articulated goal. Like, we want to write a series pilot, and we would like to pitch that to some different studios and things, or whatever you're going to do with it. And maybe the first goal is just we're going to finish writing it. Like, maybe that's just all the goal is. Okay, we have a shared goal, and now the second part of that shared goal is we want it to be the best it possibly is. One of the things that I try and do whenever I write something is I think of myself as also the producer of the thing. And when you wear a different hat, it completely changes your perception of, like, all of a sudden, if I'm the producer, even if I wrote it, I don't give a shit about how good the writing was anymore, because it has to be good enough for me to produce. So if I'm looking at the sheet of paper and I wrote it and I go, I don't want to produce this. This is bullshit. Even if it's just one scene, I go, this scene's got to be cut or changed or something, because I'm now the producer, and the producer's the one that has all the money going towards it, right? Yeah. So all the blood, sweat, and tears might be over here, but if the money's here and the money doesn't see the blood, sweat, and tears as being valuable, it's got to go. And so I always try to put that hat on too, so that I'm not just thinking of myself as like the creative, but also the person who's going to produce the thing. And I'm not going to produce something that's going to be shit. I don't want to do that. So it just changes your perception of, like, it makes you less like grasping and holding on to the writing part. And you're like, it can't change. Like, when you're the producer, you're like, it can change, man, because it's got to be the best it's got to be, or else I'm not putting it out there. So those are some like rules of thumb that I try and use from both a perspective standpoint and like an actual team, like who's contributing what and how are they contributing.
Yeah, I think that's where, like, we still haven't talked about what X, Y, and Z is going to be yet,
right?
But we all have our own ways of, I guess, like, ideas of what we want to happen in the story. But I think that that pretty much put in perspective how we should be going about co-writing something, because I literally had no clue on how this was going to be written as far as us three. Like, he writes something, I write something, but you think about it, like, you can't get nothing done well like that kind of strategy. So that put into a lot of perspective what exactly we need to do.
I have seen people do this before too, and again, this is like very descriptive roles, but I have seen people do, like, okay, here's the outline. We all agree that this is exactly the outline we want and how the characters are going to move through this story. You write scene 1, I'll write scene 2, you write scene 3, I'll write scene 4. I have seen people do that as well. And that only works when a lot of pre-work has been done. That's not how I work all that well, because I don't like having a perfect. So here, let me just share with you the way that I work. And actually, there's I cannot remember this creator's name. There's a woman on YouTube. You'll know if you found her because she has red hair and glasses. And I wish I remembered her name. I feel like it's like Jessica Ellis or something like that, but I could be totally wrong. She has it's predominantly for prose writing, like book writing, novel writing, but it works perfectly for screenwriting as well. What kind of writer are you, and in what environments do you thrive? Are you like the pre-planner who plans everything out and then just needs to like finish the scene, writing the scenes? Are you somebody who just starts writing and then like you figure it out as you go? I fit into the category where I have an idea, I have to start writing it, then I have to stop and plan, then I have to write it again, then I have to stop and plan, I have to rewrite it again even before I've written the ending. So everybody's going to give you slightly different advice. Some people will say, just get everything on paper and then go back and edit it, and it doesn't matter. I don't like doing that. It doesn't work for me. Like, it doesn't work for me to just write a story from start to finish, because I want to know that I'm, again, building the dopamine. And I don't know if I'm building the dopamine if I just blurt it all out into like this one draft. Now, some people will say, no, I still build the dopamine. I just blurt it all out onto a draft and then go, where do I need to adjust to get the dopamine hits correct, right? That's totally fine. You can do however works for you, but you kind of got to know how you do it, and you kind of got to know how your co-writers do it, so that you can kind of make sure that you're using all of you to the best of your abilities. I've also seen people do like, I'm going to write the first draft, you write the second draft, and I'll write the third draft. So Tones writes the first draft and he says, here, Colin, take a look at this. See if this draft is good. Colin goes in and goes, I love these parts of it. This didn't make sense to me. I rewrote it like this. And then he hands it back to Tones. And then you hand it to Camper. You're like, Camper, is this are we in the right direction, or are we not even in the right ballpark? It's just, as long as you define what it is and you stick to it, then you're not constantly stepping on each other's toes and getting pissed off at each other.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And that like I said, that was one of the biggest questions I wanted to ask you. And but yeah, I put a lot in perspective. I had one more question for you, and I'm pretty much good. I did watch a couple videos on YouTube, people kind of explaining before they start or when they write, but a lot of terms that came up were storyboards or story cycles or story circles. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is that a effective way of writing in your opinion? Like it looked kind of simple. The guy put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then all the way around. But a story circle looked pretty simple to how someone would write a story. Is that something you do?
So I don't use circles. Let me. The most helpful structure that I have ever used is called the paradigm. And the paradigm came from Sid Field. Sid Field, what he did was he looked at the most successful movies that had ever been made. So it is predominantly a movie format. Although I will tell you, I feel like it almost works well for any story that's ever told because of the way he addressed the problem. What was he trying to do? He was trying to understand what made amazing movies amazing from a structure standpoint, right? Because there's lots of things that make movies amazing. The characters, the way it was shot, the way that everything was completed. But what he was trying to address the story specifically, and what he came up with was what he called the paradigm. And what he said was, here's Act 1. What happens in Act 1 for the best films? Here's Act 2. What happens in Act 2 for the best films? Here's Act 3. What happens in Act 3 for the best films? And what he said is that there's a basic structure that all stories tend to follow. There are some great stories that don't follow this, so it's not like a perfect thing. But most stories tend to follow this. And the reason why it works is because and by the way, the story circles do the same exact thing. It's very, very similar, just a slightly different format. Mm-hmm. And story circles to me have been more popular because like Dan Harmon has one that he uses all the time. So if you look up Dan Harmon, he's the guy behind, I'm pretty sure he's behind, I think he was behind Community, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe he's also behind Rick and Morty. I think he's involved in too. Mm-hmm. He's like super successful. So usually take what successful people do and repeat it. Right. So story circles is kind of like one of the ways he does it. I like the paradigm, but the reason why here's my assumption. Okay. I don't know this for sure, but I think the reason why story circles work a little bit better in the TV context is that you're writing for a longer period of time. There's a lot of times when a TV show will be episodic in nature, which means that it has to finish a circle, and then the new one has to finish a new circle with maybe only a little bit of elements coming from the previous series, or the previous show, I should say, episode. That is not. I am not as much an episodic storyteller. I am more of a long-term serial storyteller or a short form. This is the story and it's done storyteller. So I can't speak to circles that much because I don't study circles as much as I study more of like the paradigm and like what beats do I need to hit in Act 1? What beats do I need to hit in Act 2? What beats do I need to hit in Act 3 in the formats and the mediums that I'm telling stories in? So I would say my advice to you would be definitely talk to some people who use the circle methodology, especially since you're doing TV. I think it makes a lot more sense. And I'm not an expert in that.
Is proof of concept a thing for TV shows as well, or just movies?
It's mostly used in movies, but there's no reason it wouldn't work for TV. Like, okay. So it goes back to that same principle I was talking about earlier, where if you are given responsibility in a small piece to a small piece, then you just build on top of that piece and then build. Let me literally, I think we talked about this a little bit, but like literally, I wrote No Vacancy and the Harlequin, the feature, at the same time. I wrote the Harlequin first, then I wrote No Vacancy because I was like, I really like the Harlequin. I think I could actually get it produced. Let me write No Vacancy as a proof of concept. Then what did I do? I went and I submitted No Vacancy to contests. It got really good results. I was responsible for the contests. Now let me go and give this to some acting table reads with strangers that I've never met before and have them act it out. It went really well in the table reads. I had actors coming up to me afterwards and being like, dude, I love this script. It was written really well. I loved it. Okay. I just earned myself another little credit and responsibility, right? Then I filmed a table read in the studio behind me with some of the actors from the previous table reads. I filmed it myself so that I could cut it up and see what worked and what didn't work. I earned a little bit more credibility. Then I went out and said, hey, all of the actors that I know that are like, would only work with me if this is really legit. And my friend who's a DP who would tell me the truth if it was not legit. Here's my script. I've earned the ability to send it to you because look at what all I've learned along the way. People really like this. Okay, cool. This is really good. I want to work with you on it. Okay, cool. Let's produce a short film. That's awesome. Short film, hopefully it comes out really great, right? The trailer's been good so far. So then I take that and I move it to the. So yeah, I like the principle is that just keep building blocks of like, what's the next thing I could do that would give me more credibility? What's the next thing I could do to reach more people? What's the next thing? And as long as those keep going, and as soon as one of those doesn't go well, by the way, then you go, why didn't that go well? And can I actually improve it? And if so, improve it and then go back again and try to get that. And if you keep basically just take small steps towards success. And if you hit a piece where you actually kind of fail, just loop back around so that you can learn from that and be more successful, right? Like that will get you so far in all areas of life, to be honest.
You answered every question I had for you, and it literally, like, it put a lot in perspective of what I have, the vision of what we're going to write, or we're eventually going to talk about it. But this was great. This was awesome. This is exactly what we needed for sure.
Awesome. Well, you guys have any other questions? Any questions, Candid? Any questions, Colin?
I kind of do, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, so you can be as brief in your answer as you want to be. But I think that another thing that I struggle with, and you said you have a wife, I don't know if you have kids and stuff too, but the time management aspect of the writing process, like that's something that I get frustrated with personally, just because I feel like I should be doing more, but to do this, I have to subtract this, and I have to balance what's more important to me every single day, as opposed to just like, oh yeah, I don't have any other obligations. I'm just going to sit here and write, and maybe there are people like that out there, but it sounds like you have a family life, you have a personal life that's like that, you have your own career outside of your art. So how do you manage that? Like, what's your strategy for like finding time to write, finding time to edit, finding time to dedicate to these other projects?
That's a really good question. So I think it's different for everybody, right? Like, I don't have kids. That gives me a huge advantage because I'm not taking kids to school. I'm not doing whatever. And then like, what patterns do I follow? And then what patterns like work for me versus what patterns don't work for me. And here's the benefit and the drawback. Like, I'm not a person. I have a friend of mine. Shout out to Caleb Monroe. He has a word count goal every single day that he's going to try and hit with his writing. And his philosophy is, if I write, like, let's just say it's 500 words a day. If I write 500 words every day, pretty soon I've got 100,000 words, right? And so his philosophy is just like, every day if I hit this minor goal, then it leads me towards a more major goal. I don't like doing that because I'm pretty sure that he sets aside time to write too. Like, I put in a book an hour every morning to write. To me, there's two theories about that. One is that if you make time for the creativity to show up, if you make time for the muse to show up, then every day you dedicate yourself to making that time, it's only going to be so long before the muse does show up. And maybe the muse, and this is just a concept, right? I'm not overly spiritualizing this. I'm just saying, like, the concept of like getting ideas and being able to just be in the zone and write them. If we label that the muse is what the allegory is for, then sometimes the muse shows up, sometimes the muse doesn't show up, because sometimes you just got too much in your head, sometimes you got too much going on. But some people find like blocks of time to be very, very beneficial to them. I don't. I've never been the person that like creates blocks of time for that. So what I do is I try and steal time whenever possible. And usually that's either early in the morning. Usually early in the morning, I'm writing YouTube scripts, to be honest. And then late at night before I go to bed, I'm writing screenplays, because that's like when I feel like I can be the most creative. And I give myself every opportunity that if I have an idea, I can work on it. So I won't use an app. I won't use an app that isn't on my phone for screenwriting. So I make sure that I have a screenwriting app on my phone, so that when I have an idea and I want to write, I can write immediately. I don't have to be in front of a computer, and I'm going to do any of that kind of stuff. And I find that I write more on my phone than I do on my computer, because I can just write whenever I want to and whenever I'm feeling like I want to do that. And it works for me. I am able to write a lot that way, but it doesn't work for everybody. Some people have to schedule it, or else they just get like their schedule gets eaten up by everything else, So,
and see, I'm
Yeah,
having
that
that
makes perfect
issue. Sorry, Colin.
No.
I'll say my issues. And I agree 100% with Colin. It's like at the end of the day, after work, after running around with kids, I want me time. And then my me time is like, well, shoot, I don't want to sit there and have to think hard and create something.
yeah.
So I'm not in a creative mind state right now. And I feel like I don't really get that creative mind state until 11 o'clock sometimes. I'm like, well, shit, I need to go to bed, because now I have to go to work in the morning. And
Right.
then I'll be up 2 hours, 3 hours actually writing. So I agree 100%. Just trying to find that time and take the moments when you do feel creative to kind of just push things to the side if you really can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also like to, sometimes I find that I have to, this really depends on my mood, but I find that I'm oftentimes inspired by things, right? Or I learn something about the way that, so I watched Sicario and I watched Dune. Dune didn't inspire me as much as I thought it might. Sicario inspired me a lot. When I watched Sicario, I was like, I love those shots. I love the way that they did this. And then I try to recollect that when I'm going in to write my story, because that was inspirational to me, right? Like maybe it was just a song I heard on the radio. Like I heard a John Williams track or something, right? And I'm like, that was inspiring. Like that produced a feeling in me that I feel like I need to put on paper. And then I try, and if I can't do it right then and there, I'll try to recall that later on. And then that makes me really inspired, right? Because I'm like, oh, that was so cool. I want to do that same thing. And if I can recall it, then I can start working on it. But it is tough. I mean, you do, I think, have to put things down in order to pick them up. There's no question that is true.
Totally.
The world keeps telling you need to do more, but the real truth and the wisdom is you need to concentrate more and actually do less.
Right.
And that's really, really, really difficult. So everyone is trying to get you to do more for them, and you need to do some of those things. And then there's some of those things where you need to be like, nah, man, I've got to say no to this so I can pick up something else that's, and I find I struggle with that a lot, because a lot of times for me, that is the fun stuff, right? Doing this show right now with you guys is fun, but it's not actually helping me write a story. I mean, I don't mean that in like a, let me say it differently.
It's fucked up right now.
Yeah. I'm not writing a story right now, right?
Exactly.
Now the reality is, as a writer, that's also a lonely process, especially if you do stories the way I do, where like Nathan comes in but later. And so this kind of stuff gives me energy to do more writing. So I've got to make time for this, but it is taking away from the writing. And there was a time, like, so unfortunately for OG, our buddies over at Orange Grove 55, the Story Geeks podcast is something that I often have to say no to, because I need to do other stuff that's more important, right? And that just is the reality of what it is. Is like, if so you might feel like, look, Bad Thoughts Pod has to take a 3-month hiatus because I got to work on these stories or whatever it is, but you may have to drop something and pick something else up, and it just may be what it is. But you might also say, like I do oftentimes, I just need to hang out with some cool people. So I'm going to go do a podcast because my writing's going to be shit today anyways. So I'm going to go hang out on a podcast with cool people. So it just, I know that that's not really giving any really good advice. It just is what I've found to be the truth, is like picking up something else. You can do it for a time, but as a person who has had a chronic illness ever since COVID came around, like I can't pick up another thing. I'm sorry. I can't pick up another thing. I just can't do it. So you can, like, I can convince myself that I can pick up another thing, but the reality is I can't. And so I got to be realistic about that. So that's a tough one. It's a really good question, but like that's all the wisdom I have.
Well, I definitely think that's important. And I mean, my career life is so segmented. Like I have an appointment here, I have a phone call here, I have a meeting here. It's like everything is built into a calendar where my entire life revolves around my work calendar. So if I have to plan something in the future, it's like, well, I don't look at a personal calendar. I look at my work calendar to see, am I even in town that day? I don't know. So I totally think that for me, a lot of the times I like to think that if I put something on the schedule, I'll commit to it and my mindset will be right by that time. But same thing that Candid said, then that time rolls around and it's like, well, I just lived my entire career schedule life all day. Right. I kind of want to do more free flow life and, kind of do what I want to do. And sometimes that just so happens to be, I want to write, or I want to work on the small aspect of the story that I'm working on. Like, I just want to fine tune this character, or I just want to work on some ideas. So no, I think that's helpful, because it's nice to know that there are, many ways to skin a cat kind of thing. Yeah. And I think that it's important that, especially working with 3 people who are so different in many ways, we might have a Venn diagram overlap in some areas, but I think being aware of, like you said originally, like being aware of how we all work is going to make us all work. And I think that that's the biggest difference. That's probably the biggest thing that I can take away from this, is like, dang, like that's really insightful, because, we kind of go into it like, like we're just talking, and it's like, I think that once we kind of get a better understanding of how we all approach these projects, or how we approach this idea, we'll have a better way of actually developing the way that we all write ourselves. So yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that. But thanks again. That's kind of all my questions too.
I feel like we're builders. Like we're just building this tower, and I put one piece up, and then Colin's next, Tony's next, and just keeps going. But the pieces are kind of like just going whatever way they want to go.
Tower of Babel style.
But at the end of the day, we all know each other well enough that we're going to make it to the top, and it's still going to become this tower, and it's not going to crumble. And I think once we start getting closer and closer to top, it's going to start straightening itself out, and it's just going to take some time. But I'm more than happy. Like the happiest. I told Tones this a while ago about Colin. Like the way Colin's mind works is like just nothing I've ever seen in my life. It's crazy, and I think that's why he's been around for so long.
I'm a crazy person.
He's crazy. So once Tones like, hey, you know what? We're gonna bring Colin on this. I'm like, all right. I'm okay with that. And then he comes in, then like shit goes this way, and I'm like, fuck, what do we start swearing? What are we doing now? And then but at the same time, it makes me become like inspired and more creative now, because I'm like, wow, now I need to keep up with Colin's pace, because that's an extra person that's in that, not in a race, but that's an extra person that you're running with, and you need to be able to keep up with them too. So I think having 3 people on paper sounds crazy, but I think having the right 3 people can actually work.
Exactly.
Yeah, and real quick, yeah. When I initially brought it up to Candid, he said yes, and we asked him, he was more than happy, and then we had talked about it, and he said at first he wasn't like vampire. I believe he said he's not really interested in vampires, but the way that I explained the storyline, and he was like intrigued. He loved the way the direction was going, and what I loved about bringing him on was the questions that he had asked me that I didn't quite have the answers to at the time. Because I was just writing down things that came to my head at first. Yeah. And then when he was asking me these questions, I was like, I'll have to come back to you on that, because there was a lot of questions that I didn't have the answers to.
Right.
And like I said, once he started asking those questions, we knew he was going to be perfect for this story because he was asking the right questions that I didn't have the answers to.
Yeah,
Any of those fancy words.
Yeah, I'm the one that reads the books in the group. I'm reading all the books.
Yeah, I think you guys will have a really good and by the way, I think that this will also help with finding the time, because let's just say that so here's where you're going to run into problems and here's where you're going to run into solutions. What are each of you able to contribute, and be honest about that, and how much you're going to be able to contribute and be honest about that, and then also say, what am I bringing to the table that you other guys really respect? And therefore, when I'm asked for it, not only am I energized to do it, but I know that my opinion will be respected, right? And you can just externalize that and put that out there and be like, Colin is the detail guy. He's going to be analyzing all the details and making sure that this story works. I mean, that's kind of like Nathan Sheck for me a lot of times, right? Especially when it comes to plot and character related stuff. If I think a character is going along an arc and it's working, Nathan will be like, I mean, you completely missed a step that didn't get me to where you wanted me to be, right? So, but I'm the guy who puts the words on the paper. So the stories don't get done if I don't do that. So it just depends on what each person is contributing and making sure that what their contribution is, that was obvious when I was directing the short film too. It was like, I know what each of these people came to contribute. I know what each of them are good at contributing, and I can pick and choose. Like when Lucas tells me something about this, most likely he's right, and I need to pay attention to that. If he says something to me about this other thing, that's not really his role. It's not even really his thing. I can ignore that piece of advice, right? I'm picking on Lucas, but it could be anybody, right? Yeah. What if we did this? What if we did that? What if we did this other thing? That made it easy as a director to go I should pay attention to these people about these things and not these people about these other things. Not that I'm not going to listen to any idea, because I will listen to any idea, but I'm going to run the filter of, does that idea fit or does it not fit? And then, and I'm going to go from there. But that's because we had all articulated our roles so well. I knew what I could draw from and what I couldn't draw from. If I hadn't articulated the roles well, it would be chaos. What ideas am I paying attention to? What ideas am I not paying attention to? Why? Those kind of things. So I think defining roles and sticking to them is essential to collaborating in any context. And I think as long as you guys do that and have an understanding of what that looks like, and an understanding of who will be the bottlenecks, Candid is going to provide this awesome stuff, but Candid could be a bottleneck too. So how do we work around that, right? I think that all of those things are on the table, and if you address them, then you're good to go.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm pretty much good, Jay.
Cool.
You answered every question I had, and man, like I said, I feel like we needed this. We needed this for sure. Gives us definitely a direction on how we want to write and what we want to write, and the objective we want to get across at the finish line. So
nice.
I want to thank you, Jay. I appreciate it, man.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Thanks for listening to my long-winded explanations of things.
I love it
because I'm I really, one of the reasons why I talk so much is I really just want to convey meaning. And sometimes that's difficult to do in a short period of time. I really respect the people who can do it. I am not good at doing that. So thanks for sticking with me on all of it. Yeah. I think you guys are going to nail it. I'm super excited to read it when you guys come up with it. I'll send you the link to the Screencraft article because I think it's really good. It explains some other things. It also gets into some things that are a little bit more excessive. You don't need to worry about that. It's okay. Your A storyline, your B storyline, your C storyline. Right. Don't worry about that. Just let the story flow at first, But I think you guys are going to kill it. I can't wait to see it. And it's nice to meet you, Colin.
Yeah, likewise, Jay.
Always good to see you, Tones. Always good to see you, Candid. And I'm sure I'll see you on another OG 55 or a Bad Thoughts pod soon.
Yes, sir. And will you be the first one to read our script?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Send it my way. I'd love to.
Love it.
Fantastic.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. That was awesome.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah.